Hey everybody, I'm Jamie Warren. I'm the founder of Killscreen. Killscreen is an arts and culture organization committed to advancing the practice of interdisciplinary play. We were founded back in 2010, and we seek to drive the intersection of design, culture, and impact through cross-disciplinary collaboration. And we want to show the world why play matters. The big reason that we're doing talks like this is to help break down barriers that have traditionally segregated play and games from other creative disciplines. And we're trying to foster, a diverse community of creators with great relationships to the world around us. So thank you so much for joining us. And this is our second webinar online event. So please bear with us if there are any technical issues. I always need to ask for forgiveness in advance. So just a couple, just a couple housekeeping notes. Let's see here. If you have a question, so for Zoom, please hide non-video participants. And if you see Camille, for example, please hide them. Camille's working in the backgrounds. We'll be recording this and posting it later. So if you missed something or want to go back and rewatch this, it'll be available. We'll send an email out to you along with a post-event survey. There's Q&A, so feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. We'll do our best to field your questions like as we go, so don't have to necessarily wait until the end and say, oh, I have a great question about something specific. Feel free. We may not be able to get to it. If it's a technical question, you can also use the Q&A function, which should be down there in the bottom if you have a particular question. You can also follow us on Twitter at Killscreen and on Instagram at killscreen.com. All right, so let's jump in. We'll give a brief introduction to Lauren. Thank you so much for joining us. Lauren is a multimedia object maker, illustrator, and art conservator from New Jersey. Her work has been exhibited in venues such as the Museum Arnhem in Amsterdam, Aeromont School of Arts and Crafts in New York City. She's been a part of New York City Jewelry Week and Peters Valley School of Craft. Her work has also been featured in Hyperallergic. Lauren attended Tyler School of Art at Temple University in Philadelphia, where she received a BFA in metals, jewelry, CAD/CAM in 2019. She's currently studying part-time at Rowan College of South Jersey, Rowan University, and Temple University as a pre-program art conservator. She was a studio assistant at Peters Valley School of Craft and artist in residence at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, and is based in Philadelphia, which is something that we both have in common, being both Philly people. I promise there will be no questions about gritty or Philly cheesesteaks or do you have a favorite cheesesteak place like in the Philadelphia metropolitan
Not really.
area?
I'm not really a big cheesesteak fan.
That's totally
like
fair.
sacrilegious.
That is the correct answer. In fact, is
yeah.
like, you don't have to be a cheese.
I've like never been to Geno's.
That's totally fine. All right. Well, Lauren, let's get started. I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and specifically like how you came to the material culture as games as a medium. So you tell us a little bit about your background. What kinds of things were you into growing up? Like how you made the decision to kind of follow this particular creative passion.
Yeah. So I went to Tyler School of Art, and we have a metals, jewelry, and CAD/CAM program there. And I liked that program. I was attracted to it because I liked how technology focused it was. What really brought me in was they had like a huge 3D printing lab with like, I think they must have like 15 3D printers. And so all that like shiny technology was really attractive to me because I had been really into like the topic of like science fiction in art for a long time. And I had also been really into video games before I went to college. When I was little, my first like video game console was the little like Game Boy Advance, and I would play like Pokemon a lot and Zelda. And so I went to school and I got really into 3D printing and technology, and then I also learned how to make work with like metal and different types of plastics and stuff. And the art form and like just this like small sculptures was really attractive to me because I could use almost any material I wanted. And then from that, I went to Peters Valley School of Craft, where I learned more about like the historical background with craft. And from there, I've just been more interacting with the contemporary craft field at large, which has kind of led me to where I am today, becoming an art conservator.
Yeah. I don't think we talked about this, but on the sci-fi side, I mean, there's so much that, is so much that gets created. Obviously, so much is done digitally now, but, certainly for, earlier sci-fi films, were there any that were like particularly resonant for you, like as a child, or like looking at the things that were created for, particular films or TV shows?
Well, I know that lots of them used to use like a lot of tiny models. But in terms of like special effects, I was really into horror movies. Well, I still am really into horror movies, but I really liked like all the special effects that John Carpenter would use in The
Yeah.
Thing. And that was like a lot of like silicone and like uh like plastics and stuff, and like that's the kind of materials we were working with in school, so I found that really interesting.
Yeah.
And especially like all the like fake gore I really liked in horror movies with the like the real special effects with that. So
Yeah, yeah. So as a child, you were not making any like thing prop elements, like scaring your parents or.
no, I didn't have access to that kind of stuff, but I was still really interested in it when I got to school and realized like if I wanted to I could just make that as well. There
Right.
wasn't like, once I realized there was like much less of a barrier to access with all those special effects, I started watching a lot more of those movies.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes a lot of sense. So you studied jewelry and CAD CAM at at Tyler. Tell me a little about your first experiences with metal and jewelry. Was there like a moment where it sort of like clicked for you, where you felt like, oh wow, I can do some of the things I've seen in virtual spaces or in cinematic spaces. I can start to make those things myself.
Yeah, well, so my one professor, Doug Bucci, was really inspiring to me in terms of 3D printing because he like would print these 3D print these forms for his jewelry that were just like you could not make them by hand, and that was the appeal of the 3D printing in like small sculpture and jewelry, like art jewelry, was that like you could make things that were so complicated because the computer would do all the work for you. You just have to tell it what to do, and so like you could still use digital tools and have the presence of your artistic style in hand um, with that. And that was what really attractive to me. And then what really sold me was we were 3D printing like wax and then casting it with like just traditional like metal casting equipment, and like all the like molten metal like becoming something that I saw in like a computer was, you know, just so cool. So that really sealed the deal for me deciding to, focus on that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, that makes a lot of sense. Well, I mean, I guess along those lines, here, go to this next slide here. Can you tell us? So we were asking you to share some of the things that you were working on in the past. Can you tell us a little bit about what's happening here and how it relates to your work for the uninitiated, for those who are unfamiliar with your process?
Yeah. Okay. So in my art, I use this metal process called anodizing with titanium. And so anodizing is when you run an electrical current through titanium, and it creates the chemical reaction creates a oxide layer on the metal, which is a bright color depending on how much electricity you run through it. And basically, it's just a process that you can use to make your materials colorful. And
Mm,
I was really attracted to all the color because I had been doing these illustrations, and I had been like taking inspiration from all these like really saturated like art, like with movies and video games. And so I jumped at the opportunity to use it in my 3D work, and it just ended up being this whole body of work for me. And one of my other professors at school, Mallory Weston, her whole body of work has a ton of titanium. So I got to be taught by one of the people who was really familiar with it, and I just really ended up investing a lot of time in it.
yeah, yeah. No, is it difficult that color side in terms of like working with metals? Is that a difficult part of the process, like working strong, like with strong colors like that in your particular work?
So sometimes it can be difficult, like with getting like metals to be a lot of different colors. Sometimes you have to use like patinas that are like strong chemicals and stuff. So from a studio perspective, it can be a little bit hazardous if you're doing it a lot. You don't want to expose yourself to all these different chemicals all the time. But with the anodizing process, you don't need any like crazy chemicals. So when I had just graduated, it was really attractive to me in my studio because then I didn't have to worry about like inhaling like noxious fumes. All you need is like,
Same here. Same in my everyday life.
yeah, you like don't want to put yourself, at risk because you want to be doing it for a long time. So the anodizing process was attractive to me because like from a studio safety perspective, it was helpful. And then also because it's really easy to replicate it over and over with the same consistency because it's pretty like a kind of scientific process. So you can standardize all the different elements so that you can make the same thing over and over again.
Right. Now, where is this? So is this something that you're doing, this image right here? Is this something that you're doing at home? Like, what is your setup for this particular piece?
So yeah, this is just in my studio. How you do it is you have like a little, I don't know, like a power box. Like it's just like an anodizing machine that provides the electricity. And then you put your piece in water so that the water will carry the electricity evenly over the entire surface. And then the part that I'm touching, the piece that gets colored with, is connected to the power source. And when you touch the metal, it completes the circuit. And then when the circuit's complete, that's when the anodizing process is happening. And then when I remove my hand, that's when it stops because the circuit is no longer completed. So I'm wearing a rubber glove in there because if I wasn't, I would accidentally electrocute myself, which I did, but no longer make that mistake.
Got it. Yeah, we have a question from Diana Carnes, was asking about like why the color keeps disappearing and reappearing. Aside from the fact that it's a looping it's a looping image.
Okay, yeah. So the image is looping, but the anodizing process goes through a whole spectrum of colors because the oxide layer becomes thicker and thicker, which just refracts light in different ways. So if you stop at any point in the process, that's the color you'll get. So sometimes I'll like let it run for longer on some components of a piece and other components of a piece so I can get like nice contrasting colors.
Ah, awesome. That's really cool. Thank you,
Mhm.
Diana, for your question. And if anybody else has any questions, please do. And I have a unusual pronunciation for my name. So if you have so if you also have an unusual, or you would like me to pronounce your name correctly, I will do my best, but you can also type it in phonetically. We can do that as well. All right. Well, we can keep going here. All right. So I want to talk a little bit about, so this is the Planes of Mystic, Mystic and Material Memories. It's a digital collage, like on matte paper. And tell me a little bit about this, the triptych structure that you had put together. We talked a little bit about your background in illustration and how that intersects with metalwork. So I'd love to hear a little bit about kind of like how you're putting this piece together. And then like, how does something like this then get interpreted into like metalwork and jewelry?
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to make a triptych because I was looking at a lot of like medieval art and like stained glass, and I am a really big fan of Hieronymus Bosch, and he's made a lot of really crazy triptychs. So I wanted to make a triptych, and I also wanted to use it as an opportunity to do some world building. So like illustrators do a lot of world building and artists do a lot of world building. And so I wanted there to be like a lot of like density of information. So the middle panel is kind of like this more of like a gateway type of theme. It has like all these keys, and then there's an actual arch. And then I had the like three-pronged object is kind of like a reference to a dowsing rod, which is a divination tool that people would use to find sources of water. So this is the middle panel is all kind of about like searching and finding this gateway to this like dimension where I'm doing all my world building in. I'm kind of imagining like all my objects and my body of work all coming from like this like kind of strange timeless dimension. So that's the middle panel. And then the left and the right panels are kind of like the different facets of this world. So the left panel has more like natural imagery and like creatures and like animals and stuff. So that would be like the mystic plane. And then the right one, well, it's right from my perspective. I don't know if it's from everybody else's, but the right one has like more like material things like objects and gems and like bottles of like vessels and candles and stuff. So that's kind of like the more tangible side of the this world. And like the mystic and the material are kind of like two sides of the same coin. They're like opposites, but they kind of go together, especially in if you're thinking about something magical like alchemy, like there's like a lot of internal parts to it, but then it's based a lot in material. So
Mhm.
I was kind of trying to show like all the different facets of this world I was thinking about my work in.
Yeah. We typically think of, your craft as not being like a screen-based medium. And when you were first working with like jewelry and technology, did you get any like pushback when people were like, no, you're supposed to, like, when you're doing jewelry and metalwork, it needs to be, you don't start here, right? Like you don't start with something like this. You do, you start in another place.
So I think just because of the program I started out in never really saw it as like a dichotomy, but
Yeah.
that perspective does exist in the field where it's like, okay, well, this is like a traditional medium. Like the traditional medium is, based in like, you know, the tangible, and like all these technological things are taking away from the tradition of the medium. But the way I was like taught with my mentors, like nobody ever really saw it as a dichotomy, and I don't think it has to be a dichotomy. There can be a little bit of both to make something greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, no, that's such a great point. Um, well, I mean, I guess we can talk a little bit about, this is synthetic relic. So can you tell me a little bit about the relationship between like what we just saw previously and then something like this? I know you also have some of your pieces with you as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, can you tell me a little bit about that transition? So how do you went from designing something in screen to like this much more physical process?
Yeah, well, so I'm still using the computer making these types of objects. Like I will lay out all my metal fabrication on like a 2D plane so that when I like cut and saw and file it all out, it's easier for me to fabricate. But so the process starts digitally, but ends up being tangible in the end. But so this piece, conceptually, I was thinking about maybe I was thinking about how like pendulums are a divination tool. So I was thinking more about like the magical side of it, and then um, I was thinking about something that you might like kind of arrive at in the midst of some sort of journey. And the illustrations on the piece are kind of celestial, so I was thinking about like that otherworldly dimension all my art is inhabiting. And then I kind of wanted it to look a little bit like a puzzle box, because I was thinking about the
Yeah.
puzzle box from the Hellraiser movies, where they like they let you open it and then it like creates another dimension. And then like the claw was kind of referencing kind of like the medieval and like fantasy worlds that I'm taking inspiration from. So that's how I made this whole piece. And then I used the anodizing for it too to make the different colors to kind of reference my illustration as well. And I have it right here. I'll show you how big it is compared to an actual person. So it's like kind of big, right?
Yeah, yeah, no, of course.
But so you can see like my illustrations and stuff on it. And so that's another way that like my hand, like the style and the artistic hand is present. And I'm trying to connect my like tangible, like fabricated metal pieces to my more virtual illustrations that are taking inspiration from like this 8-bit style.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I could see, you mentioned that like early horror films, like using or early sci-fi films using scale as a way to either make things look larger or smaller. And that's definitely at play here too. Like looking at the image, this could be something that's very large, or it could be something that's like very small. And as an earring, it could kind of work on both different. Um,
Yeah, yeah, I like that.
yeah. Well, I guess along those lines, like, do you think of your work as like being wearable? Like, do you have an ideal? They often say for writers, like, you should write with an audience in mind. Is there like a person or, yeah, how do you sort of think about wearability of your objects as part of your process?
um, I don't, I think a lot of my objects are more sculptural, like more wall objects. Like even like some of my smaller pieces, like my woven pixel series, which is like these ones, they're like not, you're not gonna like wear that to like, I don't know, a Christmas party, Like it's kind of like how like you mentioned this comparison about how like runway fashion is not necessarily it's kind of just like a concept. So
Yeah.
like it's kind of based, my work's kind of based in um, the concept of wearable as a function. So it relates to the body um, in terms of concept, but I don't think it's really, more of it's less of a production line and more of like a exhibition function.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Well, can you tell me about could you showcase what you just showed a second ago? It was a
The
piece from the,
this
yeah.
one?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Can you tell me a little bit about there's been a deeper interest, amongst game designers in the use of 8-bit, and some of that's nostalgia driven. It's a function of, games that people grew up with. What does like the pixel represent for you, and how did that come to play for the piece that you just showed?
Okay, so this was the first one I did with this technique where I'm like weaving the metal. And so I was trying to bridge my illustration with my tangible work, right? And so I had already been using this like 8-bit pixel style. And that I was attracted to that because of the nostalgia, but also because there is like a density of information with pixels that I think is really concise, and it um, allowed me to make like a lot of these little symbols that I like to use, um, kind of like, I don't know, like how hieroglyphics would work,
Yeah.
and just communicate a lot of information. And then so I was attracted to it in that way. And then I also really liked the just how colorful the style was, because I have more of like a maximalist approach to color. And so I liked those two elements, and that's kind of what drew me to the 8-bit. And then so I was trying to carry that over to my metal. And the density of information works when you're trying to make something out of fabrication, because then you don't have to try and make it like, you don't have to try and do realism, you can just do something
Right.
more abstract.
Yeah, 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 absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I think that like you as someone who's making something physical or like looking to video games for inspiration, but it's working the other way as well, right? Like you see this with game makers where they're often creating digital objects. They want those digital objects to have like a tactility, like a feel to them as well. Do you think that for folks like making video games right now, do you think they're actively thinking about objects in this like anthropological way, right? This is something that like if it existed in the real world, it would have resonance and meaning and a process associated with it.
Yeah, I will. So when people are making these video games, they're like building out this like lore of this world and like trying to incentivize you to interact with it. So like this incentive to interact with it makes everything have inherent meaning. Um, and I'm just trying to think about how to say this. Yeah, so these objects in the game have inherent meaning, and they're not necessarily like constrained by the real, and so this meaning exists in real world objects too. Like people have like sentimental attachments to objects, and sometimes they mean like they reference like greater like community sentimentalities as well. So I think that kind of connection to different parts of the world is present in the objects of a video game as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do think that there's a generational gap there. I think we're seeing that, now with like digital goods, whether those are ones that are happening through like game environments or obviously through things like NFTs. Like I think for a generation that's grown up like on with digital goods, right? That the idea that these things would have some kind of value is not that unusual, I guess, at the end
Yeah,
of the
like
day.
in the like I played Hades recently, and like you can collect all these sort of like keepsakes in the game that are like you get them after like achieving like a certain relationship with someone. And like in real life people will like give each other like jewelry and stuff after I don't know, being in a certain type of relationship. So like that's kind of similar, and it's not I yeah.
No, absolutely. Well, I'd like to talk about this next piece, synthetic relic. I scrolled back here just a little bit. Yeah, can you tell me a little bit about yeah, working on from since that excuse me, the relationship between this object and the previous much larger one that you showed.
Yeah, okay. So this was, I think this was the first one I made in the series. And so um, I called the whole series Synthetic Relic, because I wanted it to be kind of like something a little bit from the past, and then which is like the relic part, and then something a little bit from the future. So a lot of my work I had been like looking to these like imagined futures from different science fiction. But then I was realizing that like imagining these futures, like that act is happening in the past. And then I was also thinking about like as an art conservator, like how we carry the past into the future. So like that became the title Synthetic Relic. And so that connects to my other pieces in that these kind of pieces all come from this world where it's a little bit timeless. The world, it's like atemporal, I think is the better word to describe it. So this piece and the large pendulum piece I made both kind of are something you would like arrive at and maybe be kind of like a event in a story, you know what I mean? And like a unique thing. And then so this piece, I thought it would be interesting to like imagine somebody like taking it off like a wall or something, and maybe like that causes
Yeah.
like something to happen, you know, kind of like in Indiana Jones when he takes the thing off the pedestal, and then all of a sudden like the temple starts collapsing. That's what I was kind of imagining for this piece.
Right, right. Yeah. No, I presume that when these are displayed, you do not encourage people to take them off the wall. I'm going to
I
guess.
wish I could, but people, like exhibitors never want that.
No, that totally makes sense. Well, I'd like to take a little bit more into the digital side of like what you were creating here. Can you walk through like your use of digital tools for basically creating an object like this, right? So we talked about what that looks like from your from your school days, but from a process standpoint, what are we looking at here, and how does this manifest itself in the actual creation of a final piece?
Yeah, okay. So there's two types of like processes on this. So the one on the left, the claws, that's how I made like the wall mounts for my pieces. And so that workflow is a little bit different than how I make the like layouts for metal fabrication, which is what you're seeing on the right. Okay, but they both happen in the same program, which is Rhino. And I like using Rhino because the license fee is like really accessible to independent artists. But so the one on the left is I'm just 3D modeling it for 3D printing. And so this is just you're using different commands in the program, right? To make something that's 3D, and then you send it to the 3D printer, and then they send it to you in the mail.
Hmm.
And then the one on the right is, there's two parts to this. So there's the actual like line drawing that I print out on just like a regular like laser inkjet printer. And so I print that out after I've like done all my little drawings and stuff, and I make a paper model if I am, feeling like putting in a lot of effort, or I just go right to the metal. But so what I do is I cut it out and I make a paper model, and then I cut it out and then I attach it to the like flat surface of the metal, and then I
Hmm.
just like saw it out with a little hand saw. I saw out like all the different lines that I do my little woven structures in, and then I can fabricate that like a traditional jeweler would.
Right,
But I
right.
also, yeah, so this is what you're seeing here. So these structures started as a drawing in the Rhino software. And this is what I'm talking about, where the computer can do things that would take so much time for you to do by hand. So like I can make all these little schematics, right? And I can just print like 5 to 6 of them instead of redrawing it a million times. Or I can draw all these little perfectly parallel lines on the computer, like so easy, and compared to doing it by hand where it would be more time consuming. And so like when
Yeah.
you're making this kind of art, you're trying to use your time efficiently. And so using the computer and like the digital tools makes me able to focus on uh, different elements and not have to worry about like the minutia.
Yeah, absolutely. So are you thinking like with like when you're working like at this stage right here, like are you thinking about like materials, like what materials you're going to ostensibly be creating, or is it more about like the shape and the form, and then you'll figure out afterwards like here is what I'm going to actually construct this like out of?
So okay, a little bit of both. The All the way on the right, there's the like sketch in front of like the human model. And so at that point, I'm probably not thinking about like what specific metal am I going to use for this. Like I know that like generally I like to use titanium because it's colorful. Like I like to use steel because it's um, strong as like a skeleton, but I'm not exactly sure like exactly where all those elements are going to go. This right next to the person is like when I'm kind of sketching it to see what it might look like. And then when I'm going to the schematic, that's when I'm thinking more like literally about like, oh, this piece is going to be made of steel, this piece is going to be made of titanium. I'm going to put a screw here so that they attach like at this point so that, you know, it can make this larger form. And then like when I'm doing the 3D printing, I have to be really cognizant of the parameters that the printer can print in, because if I'm not working with the printer, then it's not going to look very good or work
Right.
even probably.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That totally makes sense. All right. Have you ever had to make any significant changes, like when you've actually moved into this stage, for example? Have you ever had to make any significant like changes to like what you thought, like, oh, well, this worked well on the computer, but honestly, I'm going to have to make some serious adjustments to what this looks
Yeah.
like.
Sometimes the material just does not want to work with you the way you've planned. And like I have spent like hours and hours on a piece just sawing out all these little tiny lines. And then all of a sudden, like in fabrication, which is like almost one of the last steps, I realized that like bending a certain point, it just like snaps something off every single time. And I'm like, well, I have to figure out a different way to do this. And like the more you do it, like that's something that is present in craft, no matter if you're using digital or you know, analog methods. Like the more you do it, the more you learn how to do something better. So that is just like how craft works.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like I guess on the ZBrush side, you know, can you tell us a little bit more, just it's a little bit about your workflow, like working in ZBrush, and that experience of moving from, because I suspect that like, you know, you may have worked with like other like design programs like that in the past, but you know, you're required to be literate in these kind of like two different
Mm-hmm.
spaces. Like, can you tell me a little bit about like your workflow for ZBrush, I guess, for anybody who's looking to explore that tool more deeply?
Yeah, so ZBrush and Rhino are like my favorite 3D modeling programs, and they're really different. They work just the program works different ways. So ZBrush is more kind of like vectors and kind of similar to, it's like 2D, kind of would be like Illustrator compared to how Photoshop is. So like if I have kind of like a rough shape I want to make, I can make it in Rhino a little bit quicker. And then what I'll do is I'll take that file that I've made into ZBrush, and then ZBrush is kind of like you're like modeling a lump of digital clay. And so I can just kind of do maybe like some details that Rhino doesn't really like want to do in ZBrush. Like I'll just kind of, I can draw it and like model it and maybe do like the fine tuning and the surface detail work in ZBrush. And so that is my workflow, is like I'll rough it out in Rhino, and then I'll take it to ZBrush and I'll like do the surface and do like maybe some like things that I'm not really sure, like that would take way longer in Rhino.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense.
And
For
sometimes
some, yeah, go ahead.
sometimes I use Blender too, because Blender is kind of like the light version of ZBrush, but it's less expensive. So
Got it. Yeah, I mean, for anyone looking to get started, maybe somebody who's working from traditional, like from a more like traditional object oriented, like physical object, how would you recommend them like getting started, or if they want to incorporate this into their existing practice? And I guess, and vice versa, for someone maybe who's working with these tools, but now might want to make the jump over into like physical fabrication, what would you recommend?
okay, well if you're going from like hand fabrication to 3D fabrication, I think that the like interface of ZBrush can be a little confusing. You might want to try Blender because it's free, and so it's like kind of low stakes if you're just trying it out. And then you can use those skills to in ZBrush if you decide that's, you know, the way you want to work. But then so try Blender or try Rhino, because Rhino I like because it has a really low license fee compared to other programs. And there's lots of resources online for how to use Rhino, like how to make this thing. So it'll show you like how to make this kind of like ring, or how to make this kind of tool in Rhino. And like it's really easy to do something step by step. And so that's how I would do it if you're going from like analog to digital. And then so if you're going from digital to analog, well, it really depends on like where you're trying to end up, but that's how I work myself, is I'll use the digital tools and end up at analog. So you can
Yeah,
use Rhino or ZBrush to do your sketching because you're already familiar with that. Like sometimes, like if I try and sketch in a notebook, like it doesn't look like how people would think an artist sketches look like. It's like a lot of really ugly thumbnails that I've drawn, you know? So like
yeah.
if you're comfortable in a digital like workspace, use those tools to do your sketching and try and be like loose with that. And then you can make something that would end up like helping guide you in a hand fabrication setting, which is how I work myself.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. Well, can you tell us a little bit about like some of the weaving practices that you used in terms of like what we're looking at here for this particular piece?
Yeah. Okay. So this piece was the second piece I made with this like woven titanium workflow. And so I was at a residency in Houston at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, and I started doing this. And actually, I was inspired by one of the other residents who is a just does weaving. And so like weaving, normally you think of it making like cloth or something, and the threads are really thin. You don't really see as much of it as you do in this way. But the person who I was really inspired by their work was weaving like cut up vinyl billboards. That artist's name is Tim Goncharoff. And so I liked how they were using the images on billboards to create woven images. So I thought, well, maybe I can weave my illustrations into the metal by
Mm,
cutting strips of metal. And so I I hand sawed every single one of those little lines you see on the
yeah.
right. And you know, it took a long time, but the point, like a lot of times craft can be kind of like meditative in how tedious it can be. Like when I do these pieces, I just sit down and I like listen to a podcast or an audiobook, and then somehow like 6 hours later, I'm like done. You
Like
know, like
time dilation. You're like, what
yeah, you
day is
kind of
it?
just like zone out, and then all of a sudden your work is done. um, and craft has been like that for people forever. And so then after I saw these lines out, I have these little strips of titanium that I've prepped and anodized and colored, and then I can weave them like someone would be weaving a basket or like on a loom, you know. And then I actually have the piece right here. I can show you the back of it. And so
Yeah.
this is the piece, right? And then originally I had been trying to do like an image on here, but the material just like didn't, like I had drawn this like image with like all these symbols and stuff, kind of like my triptych, but the material just like didn't want to work with me on that. So I ended up just trying to do like this cloud. And that's like another example of like I get to the analog part and it's the material just is like, no, you can't do that. But it's still you just have to like kind of roll with it. So I created this, but then you can kind of see on the back, this is what the back looks like. So it kind of looks like the back of like if you turn like a rug or like a woven like tapestry to the back, this is what the back looks like in that. So you can kind of see
Mm,
how it's connected to these other types of craft
yeah.
work, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's really cool. Well, cool. Well, we got a couple more questions, and then we'll open it up for Q&A. We actually had a request. We sent out questions to everybody, or made a request to folks. Do you have any things that you wanted to ask Lauren? Someone had asked. They wanted to know like what pieces become iconic to fans, viewers, and players, and why. And I think this person. They're asking, I think, both in a digital and a physical context for like video games that you've played. They wanted some insight on why you think like certain, why certain pieces like really get a hold of people.
Um, well, the first thing I can think of is like in video games, the whole like Pokemon franchise, like the Pokeball is like the thing, the like object that you think of the most. Like it's, you know, part of every single game because it's, you know, what catches the Pokemon. So I think that like sometimes these objects kind of also function as like symbols and like logos as well. And like I said before, like objects carry all this meaning. And so like the object can kind of function as like a shorthand for
Mm.
a lot of other stuff. So it communicates a lot, just like, you know, even without words. And so I think that is kind of why things become like very like popular for like a franchise or a game. You know, it means more than just like the images, the image of it, like the colors and the pixels.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's also something with games like like games in particular, like so much of what we do is active at some level. And so, there are very few video games in which like the character does not have something or wear something, or like
Yeah.
it's not just like an amorphous. You look at something like Pong by contrast, right? There's not like I guess maybe the Pong ball or whatever it might be, but it's, certainly as
But you
games
can
become,
you think of Pong and you immediately think of like
yeah,
the image of it, which is like
the Pongs. What,
yeah.
I'm not actually sure what the is the ball the Pong, or are
I don't know.
these the
I never
Pong?
played Pong.
Or is it the sound that the ball makes when it hits the paddles?
I think
Anyway,
that would probably be like people would hear that and immediately like get flashbacks. So
yeah, yeah. But yeah, I think in any case, games, because they're so active, like, we work with objects in games in some shape or fashion. And we have emotional experiences when we play games. And so, yeah, I definitely can see like what you're saying. Like, for anyone who's played Pokemon, like, you have you have an iconic experience that you had.
yeah, it just ends up meaning more than what it literally is.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. All right, cool. Well, I think to close, I did just want to talk a little bit about like so you're studying to be an art conservator, and how do you think that balance, how are you finding that balance between like conservation, which is, a past-based practice, and with the work that you currently deal with, in terms of like looking at speculative futures and thinking about like what's going to be someday.
Yeah. Well, so in a like I think in the actual day to day, my artwork is the processes are kind of like technical and scientific, like that anodizing process. I said it was really scientific, which because like you have to do all the you have to make sure like your anodizing bath is the same every time, which is kind of like scientific method being the same every time. And then like art conservators have to know a lot of chemistry, so that the day to day is really similar between my art practice and then like becoming an art conservator, learning all this science. And then I think like conceptually and thematically, like art conservators, a lot of their work has to do with researching the past and researching art history and everything, but the purpose of all that is to make the object last into the future. You're trying to make these objects last longer than so you're
Mm,
participating in something that is isn't so immediate in the past and the future. So you're doing all this work for the future. And then that kind of relates to me in my art practice, thinking about the future from a point of the past as well.
yeah, yeah. No, that makes sense. I mean, I think I think being acutely aware that these things, by virtue of being, there are these things that will live on past whatever happens. I mean, whatever happens with ZBrush or Rhino or any of the digital programs, right? Like the fact that you do have physical objects. I mean, right, this is a huge issue in digital conservation, right? Where so much of it's tied to these commercially available tools.
Hmm.
And there is something kind of beautiful about thinking about, like, hey, how can we create something either digital or physical that will live on past when my, when
Yeah.
my
And that's
time
what
is
I
up.
like. That's what I like about art conservation. And that's what I like about, like science fiction and stuff is like you're thinking about the future and the current moment can seem, really immediate sometimes. And when you think about all these traditions, like people like traditions because it, connects you to the past, And so you're thinking about these traditions and you're thinking about the past and it just makes you a part of something that's greater than your current moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's open it up for questions before we go. So if you have any questions for Lauren, you can pop those into the Q&A. Let's see. All right. So one question we have is, what excites you about ZBrush and Rhino as opposed to like other like 3D modeling tools, which I know you got into a little bit, but if you would, care to unpack that a little bit more.
Yeah. Um, Well, ZBrush and Rhino, like I said, are really different, but they work really well for my workflow, and also um, there's like a lot of potential with them. So you can between the two of them, it's exciting because you can create so many different things, and so that is what drew me to the field of like metals, jewelry, and CAD/CAM and contemporary crafts in the beginning was that you weren't really constrained, and so the potential with ZBrush and Rhino is really exciting to me because between those two tools, you can model almost anything. And I haven't really explored a lot of other like 3D modeling programs. Like I know that like I mentioned Blender, right? But Blender is similar to ZBrush. They're like from the same kind of idea. So with those things, you can make like so many things, like, and people use them for so many things. So that's what really draws me to them and makes me excited about using them, and keeps bringing me back to just like sit in front of my computer.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, you also make work that references stained glass. I think you talked about that a little bit with the triptychs that you had worked on. What interests you about religious, spiritual, maybe also alchemical research and motifs?
Yeah, well, so I think stained glass just, is inherently beautiful. So that first off draws me to it. And then it's like I said, I really like colorful things, so I really liked all the colors. And then stained glass is used in a lot of like churches and stuff. Like I remember in my one art history class, we were studying like all the stained glass in Paris. And so I like all the religious themes and stuff that people use to use stained glass with. One of the ways that people use stained glass in churches is when the light comes through, it is like heavenly. It references, it makes visible people's connection with God, because it uses the light to make it more like ethereal and illuminates these stories. So I'm really attracted to the like rich storytelling that people use stained glass with, and all the imagery. And then the like religious art really is appealing to me, because people would make religious art and like be patrons of religious art because they wanted to be a part of something greater than themselves, which is really compelling.
Yeah. Yeah. No, no, absolutely. Yeah. I think meant to like draw the eye and add more to like hopefully what is already a, magical and special experience. Great. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Let's see, we can go back here to if for anyone who's interested, you can follow Lauren. Lauren's website is lauren-eckert.com, and or you can follow Lauren on Instagram. You can do the same for us, killscreen.com. We publish we publish interviews and wonderful stories every single week with interesting and dynamic creators, people like Lauren. So if you're interested in those types of things, please go to killscreen.com. And we have a weekly newsletter called Playlist that we just send out updates. And that's how you would hear about more events like the one that we have with Lauren. We have an event on Monday with artist and game designer Zach Gage. Going to talk about balancing being a commercial game designer and a professional working visual artist. That will be on Monday. So if you like what you heard here, please encourage you to check that out. Otherwise, thank you all so much, and I hope you all have a great weekend.